Our first arc of Scion was largely setting up the world of Avalon. It introduced our main cast members and gave our lead character, Ethan, something to do, specifically stopping a war. And sure, that didn't really work out, but that's okay, because Ethan's journey was far from over. Our second arc then built on everything that the first one introduced. The Raven royal family was fleshed out more as antagonists, the Underground got some more screen time, and Ethan's sigil was shown to be far more useful than just healing and or causing cosmetic damage to the heir of a rival kingdom. Emotionally, a lot of Ethan's journey has been one of self-reflection. As the flashpoint for a war between countries, Ethan has held himself responsible for centuries of hatred and rivalry. In the first arc, this drove him to return home and save his family instead of aiding the enslaved lesser races of the East. This decision didn't sit well with Ethan, but he was the one who caused the war in his eyes. As far as he was concerned, he had to do it. Having thus saved the Heron lands from the invasion, Ethan lost his older brother, Artur, instead. Ethan's motivations now shifted from guilt over causing the war to guilt over Artur's death. This recklessly drove him back east into enemy lands, and finally brought him back to battle with the newly crowned King Bron. However, Ethan's experiences fighting against Exeter and his new experience in handling the sigil made him overconfident. Empowered by his own gifts, Bron was able to critically wound Ethan and send him packing. Now, Ethan, Skink, and the Raven Princess Ashleigh are on the run. But what now? Ethan's motivation to save his family was a good one, an admirable thing, but what can he do against a nation's army? His desire for vengeance is less of a good motivation, I would argue, but it is an understandable motivation. At the very least, Bron is a danger, as demonstrated by the murder of his own father. But Bron also seems unreachable now. So what is left for Ethan to do? What drives him now? Vengeance? Loyalty to his family? Guilt over the war? Maybe desire for a certain princess? For the first time in Scion's relatively short history, our story does not have a clear goal that we are building towards. Which means that Ethan has to find one. And he won't be doing it alone. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 18.10 of Scion, Uncomfortable Allies. Issue 14 continues with our main creative team, which is author Ron Marz, penciler Jim Cheung, inker Don Hillsman II, and colorist Justin Ponsor. King Bron paces, monologuing to his deceased father. He tells him how great the funeral was. He even managed to squeeze out a few tears for dear old Dad. You have to show the people how human and sympathetic their new king is. No one suspects the truth, he gloats. My Shen knows, sure, but she ain't talking. Sure, Ashleigh knows, but she's also fled from the capital, so no one is listening to her story. The damned Heron Prince is with her, somehow not dead, but that's a temporary setback. They will be found. And when they are... Bron leans over, almost growling at the stone relief of King Victor upon his tomb. When I find her, I'm going to bury her here next to you. He straightens back up, composing himself. Bron still does not understand why Victor chose her over him. She never obeyed Father. She cared more for those filthy lesser races than her own family, and you still chose her, Father. Well, you've paid for that decision. Bron goes to leave the room, promising that soon, Ashleigh will pay too. Author Ron Marz disguises his good old recap inside of Bron's rant, which also works well to further Bron's own personal narrative. He gloats over the body of his dead father, still angry at Victor, despite having killed him. Bron's anger goes deeper than just being upset about Victor choosing Ashleigh to inherit the throne, though. He just doesn't understand Victor at all. Bron is unable to see his own flaws, so instead, he focuses on the failings of others, Notably here, Ashleigh. I love that Bron views obedience as a positive trait, and yet he flooping murdered his own father. He also derides Ashleigh for choosing the lesser races over her own family, and again, you kinda murdered your own dad and then framed your sister for it, Bron. You, sir, are a hypocrite. And if you could hear me, I'm sure you would cut my tongue out for that. This is the same kind of behavior that Bron exhibited back in issue 11, when he condemned Court for failing to keep the garrison, despite losing for much the same reasons at Point Corday. Bron may have gained more personal power through Mai Shen, and political power through taking the throne, and even maybe a bit more control over himself, maybe, but he hasn't grown as a person at all. All of those changes, ultimately, just make Bron a bigger child. This is a very darkly emotional and darkly inked/colored scene. The creative team honestly just nailed it. Bron is absolutely fascinating to me, and it is because of scenes like this one. He shows as a very one-note kind of bad guy, but the emotional route, the work that his motivations have to do to get what he presents as, are just so complicated and layered. And all of that stuff that I just described was in only 2 pages of comic book. Yeah, I hope you're impressed, because you should be impressed. Elsewhere, the sun is beginning to set. A single warm beam of light pierces through the stone ceiling of a tall cave. A crisscrossing mass of vines crawl down from the hole, creeping along the walls. Sitting next to a small fire are Ashleigh and Skink. Having changed once again, Ashleigh sits on a rock a small distance away from the fire, a gap between her and Skink. He, meanwhile, sits next to the fire, prodding its embers with a stick. Ashleigh finally breaks the silence, asking King to tell her about Ethan. He's different from everyone else. Just look at their friendship, she says. Ethan treats Skink like a friend, not like a servant. That kind of thing just isn't possible in the East. It's just accepted that the lesser races should be treated like cattle, or worse. That's why Ashleigh joined the Underground, she reveals. She also reveals that she believes Ethan feels the same way, even if he can't bring himself to join up. Skink then relates his own history. He was an orphan that grew up on the streets of the Herring capital. He begged for coins and ate scraps just to survive. One day, King Dane was traveling through the city, and he saw Skink getting teased for his deformity, and by other lesser races' children, no less. The king took pity on him and invited him to live in the palace. He was given a job in the kitchens, and eventually worked into a position as court jester. Skink looks at Ashleigh here, completely dead-faced. This is not the face of a court jester. But the king seemed to appreciate the irony there, so it stuck. As their royal duties kept the king and queen occupied, care of their children ended up falling into the hands of Skink. The other kids treated him well enough, but he could tell that they only saw him as a servant. Ethan, however, was different from the very beginning. He treated Skink like an equal. Quote, "His heart is the truest I've ever known," end quote. Then why does he hate me? Ashleigh asks. Ethan does not hate you, Skink assures her confidently. He has been nothing but cold to Ashleigh since they started traveling together. It's been 2 days, and he has barely said anything to her. Oh, well that's easy, Skink replies. Ethan just doesn't know how to talk to you. You have to understand, Ethan has a strong concept of justice, of what is right and what is wrong. But Ashleigh's request has challenged him, making him choose between 2 rights. He wants to help her and the lesser races, but he also wants to help his family. Since he hasn't found a way to reconcile those 2 goals, he's all torn up inside, and he stays quiet. Not that he has said any of that, Skink adds casually, but I know him well enough to know that all of it is true. Oh, and there's the matter that he likes her. Ashleigh's face stays blank. She finds that hard to believe. Ethan barely tolerates her. Maybe Skink doesn't know Ethan as well as he thinks he does. Wow, she took that reveal a lot better than I would have, personally. She then asks about Ethan's sigil. What can Skink tell her about that? Skink tells Ashleigh the same basic gist that we got of issue 1. A strange Lesser Races member touched Ethan's right arm, the sigil manifested when fighting Bron, Bron got scarred, and the rest... well, it is all the rest. Whatever the sigil is, it has certainly changed Ethan's destiny. Leaning against the wall, Ashleigh sighs. Hopefully his destiny will involve helping the underground. They could use someone like him. Ethan then returns carrying a small bundle of sticks. This was all the firewood that he could find. As he chucks the wood into the fire, Skink excuses himself. Better give you two some time to chat. Ethan glares over his shoulder at Skink, while Skink smiles back at him. You know, you might be a better court jester than you think you are, Skink. So Ethan sits down on a rock to Ashleigh's right. She thanks him for the firewood, and he says sure. They then pause awkwardly, which is a perfect moment for us to have a bit of a breakdown. Skink and Ashleigh's conversation reveals 4 main things to us. Skink's personal history, the fact that Ashleigh joined the underground, Ethan's own personal interior struggle, and Ethan's feelings for Ashleigh. Skink having a one-on-one conversation with a character other than Ethan is a rarity in this book at this point. Most of Ethan and Skink's scenes this past year have either been Skink talking about how Ethan's destiny is not his own, or Skink asking Ethan if killing Bron is the right course of action. Skink doesn't talk about himself very much at all, and he certainly has not been a very vibrant personality. But Mars does do a little bit of work in this scene with him, and I certainly appreciate that. We learn that Skink's hunched back form is a strange one, even amongst the lesser races, and that he was ostracized for it. This is important for 2 reasons. One, I just kind of assumed that Skink's particular brand of the lesser races was just built that way. Remember, the lesser races are genetically engineered. I figured that Skink was supposed to look like that. I don't know why you would design another race to be hunched back, but hey, we also saw a grasshopper man, and I'm not sure what purpose that he would serve in society either, from a I'm building a genetic slave standpoint. Maybe he's able to jump up and get things off the tall top shelf. I don't know. Anyways, what that indicates is that even amongst the lesser races, they have their own forms of discrimination. From the perspective of the Herons, the Ravens, and maybe us as the audience, it is very easy to lump the lesser races into one huge, just third-party group. Our narrative certainly does it all the time, after all. But just because someone is of the lesser races, that doesn't make them equal to everyone else, or even the same as everyone else. We have already seen that Exeter appears to move freely throughout the Raven Kingdom, despite being of the lesser races, and that he hunts his own kind. He is an outsider too, but clearly for his own reasons. Skink is an outsider, it would seem, because he was born that way. I wonder if that is why Skink didn't respond to the Underground's invitation to join them. Back in issue 10, when Ethan and Skink visited the Underground, several of the members told Skink that he was welcome amongst them, that he didn't need to be a servant. Skink never responded to them in one way or the other, though, which technically is a response in and of itself, but he never voiced an opinion about it either. And when asked by Ethan about how he feels about the lesser races or the Underground's situation, Skink always defers to Ethan's opinion, encouraging him to think for himself. Which is great for Ethan's character development, sure, but it tells us little about Skink. After this scene, though, we can infer a little bit more about him. Maybe Skink wasn't interested in joining the Underground because he honestly isn't comfortable around other members of the lesser races. After all, his experience as a child would have isolated him emotionally. Then, after moving into the palace, Skink would have most likely been working with humans for the most part. And as he moved up the ranks of importance, and especially once he started taking care of the royal children, I would assume that he also became some kind of like a head of the household or a major domo or like a head butler type figure. Other workers from the lesser races would probably have had to defer to him just in a job sense. Again, now putting a social strata between him and the other members of the lesser races. So honestly, Skink has no personal relationship to the lesser races because his own relationship has always been a strained one. Teased as a child, then trusted by the royal family and acting as their head boss, I guess. Skink really has no positive connections to his own race. His fierce attachment to Ethan then makes a lot more sense in that light. Ashleigh then reveals that she joined the underground. She did not create the underground. And that's something that kind of surprised me. Obviously, our main point of contact with the underground up to this point has been Ashleigh. She's presented herself as a leader, she has carried herself as a leader, and other forces in our narrative, like Ethan and Bron, see Ashleigh as the face of the underground. It makes complete sense to me that I, and the audience, would assume that she was in charge of the group. Plus, then when you find out that Ashleigh is a princess of the Raven Dynasty, she now has leadership in her blood, y'all. I can totally understand someone assuming that she was the creator of the underground. But she's not. And while that reveal isn't too important right now, it does raise some important questions about the underground. Like, who did found it? Where are they? Did they know that one of the royal flooping family had joined their ranks? Like, what a bolster for your PR department. For all that we have learned about the underground, we don't really know a lot about its structure or how it operates, how large it really is, who else is a member. I would love to see those questions asked and explored as the series goes on. We also have Skink explaining Ethan's personal inner turmoil, which we've covered quite a bit here on the show already. I probably absorbed this scene back during my previous read-throughs and internalized it, which is why it came to me so much earlier in the series. Like, literally, Skink's word bubble is basically the exact same kind of language that I was using when I first brought this concept up in previous episodes. I'm not going to dive too much into that idea now, it is just nice to see it being acknowledged within the story itself. Finally, we have the big reveal. Skink tells Ashleigh that Ethan likes her. This was hinted at back in issue 9, then further hinted at in issues 13 and 14, and confirmed here. Now, true, it isn't Ethan saying this, it is Skink, so Skink could be misreading Ethan's feelings. Maybe he could be trying to set these two up. He clearly teased Ethan about Ashleigh before, and now by teasing her, maybe he is planting an emotional seed. I don't think that is likely, as Ethan and Ashleigh have been shown to care for each other at least a little bit already. Their interactions in issues 13 and 14, although fraught with danger, were sensitive and emotionally vulnerable. There is clearly a connection there, but we are being told that whatever there was seems to have died. In the 2 days since they started traveling, a distance has grown between our two heroes, and it is clearly enough distance that Ashleigh thinks that Ethan hates her. When we return to Ethan and Ashleigh, Ethan asks how much longer they'll be traveling, and Ashleigh responds that it should be about 2 days. The mountains are roughly the halfway point. She's actually camped in this very cave before. Cool, Ethan responds. Cool. Just checking. Because once you're there, I'm out. I'm going home. Yeah, Ashleigh says, I know. You have made that perfectly clear, Ethan, several times on this trip. You know, you could be a little more grateful, Ethan argues. I didn't even have to come this far. I am doing you a favor by being here. Well, I didn't have to check on you at the keep to see if you were even alive, Ashleigh says back, and I certainly didn't have to smuggle you out of the capital. Ethan continues to get angrier. Well, none of this would have happened if you hadn't kidnapped me, and maybe my brother would still be alive too. If you think that you would have survived a year in the Raven Dungeons, then you are a fool. You aren't the only one who's been wronged, Ethan. Ashleigh is a fugitive in her own kingdom, thank you. She never even knew her mother, and now her father is... Now her father is gone. Fighting back tears, Ashleigh gets up and walks away. Just leave her alone. Rightfully chagrined, Ethan tries to apologize. He didn't mean... He's sorry if he... Damn it. He doesn't get very far with it. As he hangs his head in shame, Skink re-enters the cave. Ethan stands up and then walks past him, wanting to be alone. As he leaves, he is vocally berating himself. Could I say anything more wrong? As he rounds a nearby corner, a pair of lesser races warriors approach. They both look basically like gorillas, but they're wearing armor and they are armed with swords. Ethan nods a greeting at them. Ashleigh said that the underground would send someone out to greet them. He'll let her know that they're here. He turns and cups his mouth. "Yo, Ashleigh!" While his back is turned, the nearest fighter growls and bats at Ethan with a thick, muscular arm, knocking him off of his feet. Ethan struggles to stand back up while Ashleigh runs past with her sword drawn. Ethan says that he thought they were from the underground, and she says that they are clearly not. They're outlaws. Skink volunteers to do something, but Ethan waves him off. Then he generates his sword. They'll handle this. As Ashleigh battles one of the outlaws, the second one climbs along the wall and heads for Ethan. Ashleigh's opponent had planned to turn her in for the reward, but you know what? He's never tasted royal before. Ashleigh shouts over her shoulder to Ethan, "They aren't taking prisoners!" Ethan picked up on that, and he is holding his own valiantly, but they are incredibly fast. He is struggling just to keep up with them, and that is when a third outlaw hits him with the flat of his blade. Towering over Ethan's fallen form, the outlaw holds his sword up. "These mountains are theirs," he says. 2 more outlaw guerrillas back him up. But suddenly Ashleigh slides in and slices off his sword hand. Not to be outdone as a complete badass, though, the outlaw swings his stump and knocks Ashleigh in the head. She spins and jumps, flipping in the air, allowing her to dive forward quickly and score a slash on his chest. "They're going to get overwhelmed at this rate," she shouts to Ethan. "No, they won't," Ethan says. He swings his sword in an arc and a wave of energy pulses out, slamming into several of the outlaws. One of them managed to dodge it, though, and he jumps onto Ethan's back, shoving him to the ground. "Humans made them," he shouts, baring his fangs. "They wanted unstoppable warriors. Well, look at him! Is this what you wanted? Is it?" Before the warrior can bite at Ethan's face or neck, the camera pulls back, revealing Ethan's energy sword pierced through the gorilla. The outlaw's body goes limp as life leaves him, and he collapses onto Ethan. Our hero pushes at the corpse. "Can anyone help?" Skink does help him while Ashleigh stands over him protectively. The other outlaws flee the fight, but Ashleigh doubts that it's for long. "What are they?" Ethan asks. "They were experiments," Ashleigh explains. The goal was to make a new breed of shock troopers, but they turned out to be too aggressive. The Ravens couldn't control them, and eventually they escaped and became bandits. As she relates all of this, Ashleigh wipes down her blade, and we see that there is a cut on her shoulder. "This was Ethan's fault," he claims. "He saw the lesser races, and he just assumed that they were with the underground, and he should know better." Ashleigh warns him to judge the lesser races like he would anyone else. She also winces at the wound as her arm moves. Ethan notes the pain, saying that it looks bad. He reaches out, theorizing that his sigil healed him before. Maybe it can help her? But Ashleigh scowls at him and pulls her shoulder away. "It's just a scratch. It'll be fine." Ethan holds up his hands. "Okay." Ashleigh glares. "Okay." She starts to head back into the cave. They need to gather their supplies and move on. If those outlaws come back, there will be more of them. Ethan then, from out of nowhere, thanks Ashleigh. She pauses and actually whips around in surprise. "What?" "Thanks for saving me in that fight," he says. "And, for everything." Ashleigh calms down a bit. "Well, you're welcome. Thank you too." Beaten and bloodied, Ethan smiles. "Glad I could help." Behind Ethan, Skink looks at his charge and just smiles. To me, this is a super solid issue. The issue opens and presents us with a problem that Ethan is overthinking his relationship with Ashleigh. We are told this by Skink, literally told this, and it's only when put into a situation where Ethan and Ashleigh have no choice but to rely on one another that Ethan is reminded about how he feels. Regardless of Ethan's choice to help the underground or help his family, that problem is not Ashleigh, and he shouldn't take his frustration over that problem out on her. So, they get through the fight, and Ethan, now a little bit more clear-minded, thanks her. This is the first time that we have actually seen Ashleigh in combat, as both of her attacks on Mai Shen and Bron were fairly short-lived. Both of them used their energy powers to knock her back before she could really do anything. But against these outlaws, Ashleigh is fast on her feet, she is merciless in her attacks, and she holds her own very well. Even superpowered by the sigil, Ethan was having trouble keeping up, which is a good way for Mars to show that Ethan does have his limits. After all, we just watched him get back up after being run through by Bron. So right now, we're questioning exactly what Ethan can or can't do or survive. And Ethan even demonstrates a new skill here, launching that energy arc attack, but that doesn't make him an unstoppable killing machine. When attacked from behind, he is just as vulnerable to a solid blow to the head as anyone else. And if Ashleigh hadn't saved him, I bet that he would have a hard time recovering from a severed head. Something has to be able to kill him, and Mars is reinforcing the idea that Ethan is still vulnerable, adding stakes back into our ongoing narrative. I really like Ethan volunteering to heal Ashleigh with his sigil here. It is a small moment, but I super dig it because Ethan doesn't experiment with his sigil at all up to this point. Almost everything that the sigil has done has been accidental. When it scarred Bron, when it healed Ethan, when it created his sword, and when it kept him from dying. Those were not moments where Ethan controlled the sigil and made it do something. But this was that kind of moment. And unfortunately for mad superpowered scientist Ben, Ethan doesn't get to actually try his experiment. It does indicate that he is thinking more about the sigil and its potential uses though, so hopefully we will see more of that kind of behavior as the series goes on. The fact that Ethan misread these outlaws tickles me pink as well. Again, I am a huge continuity nerd in a very well-written comic, and seeing Ethan misjudge the outlaws just like he misjudged Exeter back in issue 3 was just great. Ethan has come a long way on his journey, to be sure. He has learned a lot, he's a bit more serious, and he definitely feels more grown up. But he also still makes mistakes. More than that though, he makes the same kind of mistakes. His perception of the lesser races isn't going to just change in one incident. Like any form of racism, even Ethan's much more benevolent form of it, it is a learned behavior, cultivated over a lifetime. It is going to take a lifetime to unlearn those same behaviors. Ethan treats Skink differently because he grew up with Skink, but he has been just as dismissive of other members of the lesser races as anyone else, and just as judgmental of them. So while Ethan is a good guy, and he is struggling to be a better person, he also still has flaws, which makes him more relatable and an even better character. Artistically, there is not a whole lot for me to comment on here. Cheung, Hillsman II, and Ponsor pair beautifully together. The fight scenes flow well, the smaller emotional moments work, but I want to mention that Ethan himself looks a little different here. He remains basically the same. He is still a fit young man with long blonde hair. But his costume has moved away from the blues and whites of the Heron Dynasty to creams and browns. He honestly looks like a cosplayer of Luke Skywalker from Star Wars A New Hope. Within the story, these are the best clothes that the group could scrounge up after Ethan's own clothing was shredded during his fight with Bron. And, the nation now knows to look for a Heron Prince tagging along with the murdering Princess Ashleigh. But there is a further connotation to his clothing change, which I will fully explain when we reach the end of this arc. Mars is visually seeding an idea here, and we are going to see it pay off throughout the course of this story, but right now, we don't really get an explanation for it. Ethan also looks a bit older in this issue. I've mentioned before that Cheung tends to draw everyone as fairly young looking. His animated style just leans that way. Most animated styles actually do. Ethan could be a very serious looking 16 or a very young looking 32. It's hard to tell. But he definitely feels older here, with a slightly more square face and a little bit longer chin, I think. His neck is also a bit thicker, making Ethan appear slightly more muscular. I've been comparing and contrasting Ethan's face here with previous issues, and whatever Cheung has changed is subtle AF. I am finding it very hard to pinpoint the differences here. But I wanted to note that Ethan does feel different, even if I can't quite put my finger on why he feels different. Oh, crap, I forgot. We aren't even done with this issue yet. I'm talking about this like this is a wrap-up. We still have one more scene to go. I'm sorry, folks. So that night, our trio approaches the Underground's sanctuary. As they get closer, Ashleigh explains that this whole area was once the first free city of the lesser races in the East. But then her ancestors took away their rights, enslaved the inhabitants, and then razed the city. She's always hoped to see it restored someday. It's a shame, honestly, that Ethan won't be staying. Well, Ethan says, it's not like he... And then they suddenly stop. Turn the page, and the sanctuary is a smoking ruin laid out before them. Dozens of lesser races' bodies litter the ground, many of them with spears sticking into the sky. The landscape is absolutely quiet. There's only one living person in that space. And he stands up. Ethan immediately recognizes that form. Exeter. And sure enough, his axes are bloody. I can't believe I forgot that this happened. I read the comic twice to do this write-up. I wrote the whole issue out, and then just casually strolling into my wrap-up comments despite having a script, I completely forgot about it. What an idiot. So anyways, yeah, we get to the sanctuary, and it is gone, and Exeter is there. Mars set up the destruction of the sanctuary back in issue 12, when Bron originally seized the throne and ordered his younger brother Court to destroy it. Our heroes were so busy trying to kill Bron, or to escape his wrath, that they just never knew. And so it's a bit hard to be surprised when you turn the page and see that everything is gone. It is still sobering and serious. It does feel a little bit whiplashy, coming off of our feel-good, everything's gonna work out, Ethan and Ashleigh are getting over their issues vibe that the previous scene had. It is one hell of a cliffhanger, though, and that is great to see. Cinematically, I can see the camera pushing in on Exeter's bent-over form, his torn, thick cloak rising with him as we move in, and then we see his shoulders shift and his axes are revealed, and they're dripping with blood. That works super well. But we had the small bounty two-parter that showed Exeter releasing a captured member of the lesser races. And this issue's story was built on Ethan misjudging a member of the lesser races when he first sees them, echoing the first time that Ethan saw Exeter. Ethan might not have learned his lesson yet, but we as an audience certainly have. So you tell me, listener, did this slaughter happen at Exeter's hand? Or are we gonna misjudge again? As we open issue 16, Ethan goes from zero to bloodthirsty in one page flat. Manifesting his sword as he explodes into action, Ethan closes the distance between himself and Exeter in seconds. His sword scrapes off of Exeter's axes as he turns to defend himself. "This is how you repay my mercy?" he shouts. Behind Ethan, Ashleigh is no less horrified, although she is slower to act. She reaches for her own sword, prepared to join Ethan in killing Exeter, but Skink tells her to wait a second. He doesn't think that this is what it appears to be. He just hopes that Ethan realizes that before it's too late. It only takes a few swings for Ethan to disarm Exeter. He throws the bounty hunter around the ruins, never once noticing that Exeter is only moving defensively. Ethan rants that he could have stopped this if he had killed Exeter before. He will not make that mistake once again. Ethan jumps at his target, prepared to finish this, and Exeter quietly, yet firmly, says that it wasn't him. Ethan stops. What? "It wasn't me," Exeter says again, from a kneeling position. "I didn't do this." Ashleigh and Skink approach, and Ethan exclaims that he claims that he wasn't involved. "No," Exeter replies, grabbing a piece of cloth from the ground. "I didn't say I wasn't involved. Only that I didn't do this." He holds out the cloth to Ethan. "This should explain." Puzzled and angry, but willing to listen, Ethan undoes the bundle, revealing a torn, blood-spattered raven flag. Ethan looks at Ashleigh, and she immediately understands. "My dynasty did this," she says quietly. Ethan asks Exeter what happens, and he relates his story. So let's pause before we get into it. So this opening isn't totally unforeseen, right? Ethan's outrage is justified. The underground is absolutely devastated here. I can absolutely see why he would be angry and eager to blame somebody. And here's Exeter, a man who has attacked Ethan twice, who is rumored to be an unstoppable bounty hunter. Has Exeter been bad enough that we can understand Ethan charging in to fight him? Yeah, sure, I would say so. But Exeter has also shown to be very careful in his hunting. When he hunted Ethan down in issue 10, there was a small Raven military presence that was doing recruiting for the war, but Exeter didn't tell them about Ethan. He tried to take him on his own. Exeter is a cold-hearted bounty hunter, yes, but he is also a bounty hunter. He wants money, not death. But number 2, we got to experience the bounty mini-story. We know that Exeter has been merciful as of late, even if we don't know the reason. So for me, even the first time that I read this, I knew that Exeter wasn't to blame. However, Ethan did not get to read the bounty two-parter. The last time that Ethan saw Exeter, the bounty hunter was trying to run him down once again. Ethan sees an enemy here, and he responds as if Exeter is an enemy. The downside to that storytelling, though, that we get to see all of the pieces on the board, is that we don't have any element of surprise here. This isn't shocking, this isn't surprising. It is cinematically well presented, sure, and everyone is written in character, and boy do they look good doing it. But in terms of this reveal having legs, it sure don't. Sorry, boys. This is well done in general, but it is lacking some spice. When we get back to the story, and Exeter starts to tell his side of things, we also have a change in our visual presentation. The flashback happens in 3 two-page spreads without panels. The pages are presented to us almost like they are pages from a sketchbook or a journal. The paper itself actually has a texture printed on it, like parchment paper, and Cheung's pencils go uninked. They are vaguely colored with browns, creams, and whites to act as highlights, but they are definitely just his pencils. This highlights the flashback nature of the scene. It feels like we are looking over some ancient scrolls, not sitting down for a verbal story time. Cheung's pencils have always been pretty tight though, so they aren't lacking despite the missing inks. Exeter's dialogue is presented in a white font in boxes that only have 2 sides. The lines are on the bottom and the right side. This makes the narration feel separate from the page itself. It is clearly not some kind of journal entry or a piece of parchment paper within the comics world that we're looking at. It is just clever metatextual presentation. But making the font white allows it to contrast with the darker pencils and the brown background, so it is very easy to read. I will critique that the second set of pages look as if the contrast was turned up digitally. They look much darker than the other 2 sets, so they almost give you the impression that they were inked at some point. If you weren't familiar with Photoshop and digital editing at all, I could believe someone assuming that those pages were inked, but I am fairly familiar with Photoshop, and yeah, someone just cranked up the contrast on those 2 pages. I'm a very light penciler myself. I remember getting spoken to all the time in my high school art classes when I would show a project sketch to one of my teachers. I would immediately get press down when you use the pencil, press down, because I was so used to drawing in my notebooks with pens. Pressing down is not something I care to do. But that is not what happened here. We just cranked up the contrast, making everything that was dark look darker and everything that was bright look brighter. I am guessing that Cheung's final pencils were pretty light in and of themselves, so then they probably raised the contrast to make things present cleaner, but that also makes them look kind of awkward compared to the previous 2 pages. As someone who is fascinated by comic books and how they are made, these pages are a real treat. They are super nice looking, they fit the tone that Exeter presents well, and they are just so nice to look at. I love Cheung's pencils. So anyway, Exeter's story starts with Ethan sparing his life back in issue 10, showing him compassion. That act forced Exeter to question what his own life was worth, and he did not like the answer that he found. Deciding to change was the most difficult thing that he had ever done, Exeter says. But he found the Underground Sanctuary, hoping to find redemption in their cause. The Underground did not welcome him with open arms, and we get to see an absolutely terrified Flitch aiming an arrow at the massive form of Exeter. But a small child approached him, and I like to think that it was Nock's son. I have no proof of that, that's just my fan theory. Exeter kneeled to greet the child, and the kid went to embrace him. Maybe, with time, Exeter could be welcome here. Maybe he could have a home. Which is when the ravens attacked. Prince Court led them in, his sword flashing, his lizard mount trampling those caught underfoot. Exeter leapt to the aid of the refugees, his axes killing as many of the soldiers as he could. But for each one that he killed, it was like 2 more appeared in their place. Sheer numbers eventually overwhelmed him. Collapsing from his injuries, from sheer exhaustion, from the heartbreaking madness of the slaughter, Exeter fell into darkness. He believes that the ravens must have assumed that he had died, because they did not check on him, and eventually he did come to. When he did, he was the only one here still alive. And then Ethan arrived. Ethan offers him a hand up, and his apologies. He saw Exeter and he assumed the worst, and he should really know better by now. Exeter replies that he understands. He has a great deal of history to live down, and it all warranted Ethan's attack. Once Exeter is up and standing, Ethan tears the raven flag in two. Why did Exeter hunt his own kind? Exeter replies, quote, that it is impossible to see any value in others when you despise what you yourself are, end quote. But after everything that's happened, Exeter wants to put his old life behind him. He just wants to help. Ethan, in the meantime, uses the raven flag shreds to bind a wound on Exeter's arm. Getting anyone's trust is going to be hard, Ethan says, and Exeter is well aware of that. Ethan then moves away from him, passing by Skink, who reminds Ethan that he had planned to go home next. And Ethan knows. He just needs to tell Ashleigh. He finds her kneeling next to the corpse of a child, and Ethan rests his hand on her shoulder. She turns, and tears run down her face. This was because of her. Court carried it out, but Bron was the one who ordered it, and he did it because of her. All she wanted to do was help these people, and look what happened. Her sadness turns to anger, but they will rebuild. There are others who believe this will not be the end of the underground. She stands up, saying that she was going to lead an attack on a secret genetics facility in the Coronar Mountains after her arrival and gaining some more help. She plans to see that attack through. Ethan is leaving though, right? Ashleigh turns away from him and thanks him for coming all this way, which she understands where his loyalties are. Ethan says that he's going with her. Ashleigh spins. I'm sorry, what? Ethan can't let her do something like this alone. Once it's done, well, they'll see what happens then when they get there. But for now, he is with her. It's the least that he owes these people. Exeter picks his axes up, saying that he knows about the place, and he would like to join them. Ashleigh says that she knows his reputation and is not thrilled to have him along. Exeter nods. He gets it. All he wants is a chance to prove himself. Okay, Ashleigh says, but only because she can't really afford to turn down any help at this point. She will be watching him, though. Ethan suggests that they bury the dead and then move on. They don't want to be here if Court comes back. Ashleigh takes a step closer to him, thanking him. She knows that his family means a lot to him, and she rests a gentle hand on his chest. Ethan covers her hand with his own, interrupting her. His loyalty to his family hasn't changed. But family means more than just your blood. Oh, floopin'! Oh! God, these two are so cute. So alright, I love the artistic styling of Exeter's flashback, I really do. Out of the entire creative team of a comic book, the penciler is the one that I have always been most fascinated by. After all, the penciler is the one who decides what a book looks like, how the characters are posed, how the world is built, and how it's presented to us. The penciler's work oftentimes is the face of a comic book. So getting to see Jim Cheung's pencils in the raw is a great treat to me. Story-wise, this scene also provides a bit of context for Exeter's recent appearance in the Bounty two-parter. We now know that Ethan spared Exeter and the bounty hunter went back to work. Business as usual, right? And so he captured Nyssa. Nyssa's persistent questioning is now recontextualized as Exeter's conscience personified. She wasn't just a member of the lesser races questioning him. From a writing perspective, she was Exeter asking himself these questions. Why does he do what he does? How can he stand to do it? How can he justify capturing free members of the lesser races just so that they can be returned to slavery while he goes free? Exeter didn't free Nyssa just so that she would stop bothering him, which is how it was presented to us, but because he couldn't bring himself to do this anymore. We've got a bit of a gap between that happening and Exeter's appearance here, and I do have to vaguely complain that if Exeter wanted to join the Underground, why not just accept Nyssa's help to do it? She outright offered to take him to the Sanctuary after all. But I think that Exeter wasn't quite at that step yet. Yes, he had decided that he wouldn't hunt his own kind anymore, but he wasn't yet sure what he would do. Once he finally knew, perhaps even after being inspired by Nyssa, he ended up going to the Sanctuary. It is a small thing of note, but I really enjoy that Flitch was absolutely terrified of Exeter upon his arrival, but also still drew on him. He takes his role as protector of the Sanctuary seriously. Or took his role seriously, I suppose. So we have the Sanctuary destroyed, and it sure looks like everyone in it was killed. I certainly don't remember there being any survivors moving forward. Obviously, this is a tragedy, but we don't spend a lot of time wallowing in the sadness either. Ethan takes his pain and directs it at Exeter, and Ashleigh begins to do the same until Skink stops her. It's interesting to me that Skink does stop her at all, but he doesn't even try to get Ethan's attention. It seems that he wants Ethan to stop. He does tell Ashleigh there is more going on here, and that he hopes that Ethan realizes it. But he is waiting for Ethan to reach that conclusion on his own. Remember, this is the third time that Ethan has encountered a member of the lesser races and rushed to judgment. Skink could have stopped Ethan, or he could have shouted out to him, but he wants him to learn and grow on his own. At least, as much as he's able to. I also, from a story perspective, appreciate Ashleigh blaming herself for the slaughter. We've seen this kind of behavior before in her. After Bron murdered King Victor, Ashleigh had a nightmare where the king blamed her for letting this happen. And now Ashleigh blames herself for the destruction of the Sanctuary. The blame does still ultimately fall on Court for carrying out Bron's orders, and on Bron for issuing those orders to begin with, but Ashleigh is a responsible woman in the same way that Ethan is a responsible man. Both of these characters willingly take on the weight of the world in the hopes of making things better. It's part of what makes them heroes. We get to see that similarity work out in Ashleigh's favor here. Ethan decides that he'll continue to travel with her, at least for one more adventure, to the secret genetics facility to destroy it. And I think that he is motivated by guilt too. Flitch asked Ethan to join them, and maybe if Ethan had been there when Court arrived, he could have saved some lives. So, regretting his failure to help those at the Sanctuary, and honestly still conflicted over which good is the greater good, his family or aiding the lesser races, Ethan decides to put the decision off for now. He'll help Ashleigh one more time, and then he's out. And this time, it's for realsies. And we have Exeter joining our cast for this adventure, which is a plus for me, because I love this guy. Who doesn't love a good redemption arc? We've got the lesser race's boogeyman, who has hunted Ethan down twice, who killed a bunch of other bounty hunters, and who has gone toe-to-toe with the Raven Army, and lived to tell about it, joining our party. This guy is a threat on legs, and now he is on our hero side and hoping to do some good. How can you argue with that from a story perspective? That's fantastic. And that would be a super warm-hearted ending to go out on, but once again, we've got a few pages left. Prince Kai of the Heron Dynasty is on a hovership, making his way east. He is not the captain of this boat. There is clearly another person handling that stuff, which frees up Kai to stare over the bow handsomely. They're fascinating, aren't they? Prince Kai turns and finds burned Rex standing behind him. "I assume you're talking about the swimmers," Kai says, "and not the rest of us." He then adds that he is surprised that Rex came along on this trip. Rex explains that the war is reaching a pivotal moment. He can feel it. The Ravens will take back Elena's fortress if she isn't reinforced. With that fort gone, the Herons lose their footing in the east. King Dane understands this, so he requested that Rex come along. "Oh, they will rescue Elena," Kai promises confidently, "which will only leave Ethan out in the wild." They've heard rumors of Ethan's attack on Bron and his subsequent rising from the dead, but what do you do with that kind of rumor? He then turns to look at Rex. You certainly have shown an interest in Ethan. Sometimes, Kai suspects that Rex is only interested in Ethan, actually. Rex is confident that Ethan will play a pivotal role in the future. His interest in the Heron dynasty is to ensure that future comes to pass. For his sake, Kai hopes that he's telling the truth. Bernd tilts his head. You really don't trust me, do you? Kai walks past Rex, stopping only briefly to say no, I don't, before moving on. And then we end in a majestic AF shot of the hovership with the setting red sun resting on the horizon behind it. A logbook entry from Admiral Edvin of the Herons sends us off with promises of war and black, bloody death. Thanks, Eddie. Way to send us off on a high note. This scene feels like a bit of an unnecessary tag-on, as it has nothing to do with our boy Ethan's journey right now, but there are a couple of things being set up here that will get paid off during this arc. First off, we reference Elena's landing and the danger that she and her troops are still in. Mars had Elena take a Raven garrison back in issue 11, and we will see that event's long-term meaning pay off in this arc. Second, we see a more personal conversation between Bernd Rex and Prince Kai. Kai remains pretty much the same character here. He is fairly serious, and he is eager to back his sister up. But where before Kai has been quiet about his distrust of Rex, voicing it only to Elena, he is fairly vocal and open about it here. Like, he actually tells Rex to his face that he doesn't trust him. When Rex defends himself, he tells us almost literally the reason that he is here, and it still goes fairly unseen. As we've discussed earlier, Rex is a member of the godlike race of beings called the First. He is specifically an agent of one of their factions, called House Dexter, and he has been sent to Avalon to find out whether or not Ethan can be used, or if he needs to be eliminated. And here, when Kai questions Rex's interest in Ethan, Rex outright tells him that his interest is in helping the Heron dynasty to keep Ethan alive, because Ethan will be useful in the future. He knows that if the Heron dynasty falls, then Ethan will either continue to fight for them, or he will fight to avenge them. And, you know, odds go up that you're going to die pretty fast if you're going to keep fighting in endless wars. He will never be a useful tool to House Dexter if that happens. So, Rex's main objective is helping the Herons so that he can free Ethan up for quote-unquote greater concerns. We also see Kai's dialogue hint at Rex's view on humanity, too. Kai's line, "Are you talking about the swimmers or us?" tells us that Rex has a noticeable bit of arrogance in his personality. That's some nice background work, keeping Rex's personality consistent, hinting at the fact that he comes from a race of godlike beings that look down on humanity, while still keeping the character moving forward in the rest of our narrative. Let's do the same. With a new temporary goalpost now established, Ethan and his allies head into the Coronar Mountains and journey into the lair of a madman. Exeter is going to confront his maker, quite literally, in issue 17. Then, in issue 18, word of Elena's siege reaches our cast, and Ethan, caught between his family ties and his new found family, has an important decision to make. Join me next week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 18.11 of Scion. Picking a Side. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.